So let me also get in Rakesh Nangia, founder and managing partner, Nangia and Company. Mr. Nangia, what are some of the changes that the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India will have to make? Recently, there was a committee for aggregation of CA firms that was set up. There was a revised guidelines for mergers of CA firms that were issued for strategic mergers. There were guidelines that were issued, draft guidelines for regulated pathways for networking and collaboration that were also issued. Are we on the path to having aggregation in the audit space among the CA firms in India?
I think, good evening, my friends. I think just to answer your question is this clearly demonstrates that the government is moving towards consolidation. Government is looking forward, basically, and not looking inward. In fact, these steps taken recently even by the institute, even by the government, in my personal opinion, is a landmark decision and making it forward for actually having big accounting firms in India. And I'll give you a very good classical example. Take the case of China, actually. China has humongously big non-Big Four firms. Yes, there have been some regulatory things which are in the favor of the firms, actually. Same type with Korea. Korea has humongously big CA firms, audit firms. And I think this current voice which is happening, this movement happening, this meetings taking place, changes, bringing in the regulations, being aware of the situation. Yes, there are more firms required rather than the entire audit business being by the few handful of companies, actually. And I add another classical example which happened 2 years back when the government opened the BFSI sector for the non-Big Fours. When they put up a ceiling, sorry, I'm correcting that, when they put up a ceiling, actually, and see how good it went off. This exercise came out to be extremely productive, extremely fruitful, and so many good firms came up and filled up this gap, and they have done extremely well. The survey, the response from the client has been extremely, extremely good, actually. This is a stage to demonstrate the government should move to the next level now, basically, beyond BFSI, bringing such regulations.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes, and there seems to be efforts in that direction. In fact, let me get in Dinesh Kanabar on that. I'll come to Vishesh immediately. Dinesh Kanabar, we've seen and we've reported on meetings being held at the highest level. In fact, there was a meeting at the Prime Minister's office also to review preparations. Sanjeev Sanyal also made a presentation there. Could you give us a sense of how things are moving in terms of the government setting the groundwork for having its own big domestic audit firms?
So from what I understand, Parikshit, and I have no inside knowledge about it, is that a committee of secretaries is being set up to evolve a framework. And this committee of secretaries is thereafter going to hold deliberations with professionals, with industry bodies, with everybody, to come back to say that what changes in the current framework, whether it is in the institute's regulations, whether it is in terms of government's own preferential pricing norms or whatever else, does the government need to do so as to promote local talent from aggregating and creating large Indian firms. So it's going to be an effort which I think will be there over the next few months with deliberations going on. I think there are 2-3 parts to all of this, Parikshit. We all spoke about what the government needs to do. I think the key thing we need to figure, and there was a point which Ajay made, which was so appropriate, that at the end of the day, the Indian affiliates of the global Big Four started small, grew up. I think the key thing is quality, the demonstration of how your brand stands for quality. And therefore, when you sign something, how is it accepted to be a globally acceptable brand which anybody can rely on? That's something which needs to be done. One other comment I would make, Parikshit, is that, in several things, India has leapfrogged because of use of technology. Today, use of technology, artificial intelligence, if this is imbibed by the Indian firms, a lot of things can be done out here. It might be a surprising thing, Parikshit, to know that some of the global audits actually happen from offices in India. So the auditors may be based in a US multinational, US auditors, but a bulk 90% of the work would be done out of India, all verification, everything else, subject to just a review overseas. So we have the talent, we have the technology. The question is the framework, and that's where the government is moving towards.
Right. Yes. So the Committee of Secretaries is now going to look at the framework that is required for having a domestic big audit firm or multiple firms for that matter. But then there is a question of aggregation. Will these CA family-controlled businesses be able to give up control? Will we be able to encourage mergers in the space as well? We'll come to that in just a bit. We're taking a short break. I'll request all our guests to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are discussing the Indian government's efforts to have deliberations and consensus on building India's big audit firms, alternatives to the Big Four. Now, there are both sides of the story. There are arguments for both sides. One is to reduce dependence on foreign firms, and the other is all these big audit firms that you have in India, all of them are actually registered in India. They're run by Indian partners, and the capital is also owned by the Indian entities. Let me go across to Vishesh Chandiok at this point. So Vishesh, as Dinesh Kanabar was pointing out, that a committee of secretaries will be formed to set up a framework to look at this entire exercise. But then a point that you raised earlier, these big audit firms have been in India for decades. Why have we not been able to build domestic capacity? One issue, of course, is that 90% of the CA firms are family-owned. What do you think is stopping us all these years from having our own versions of the Big Four?
Thank you, Parikshit. Absolutely, I can comment on that subject squarely. I've seen that evolution of our family firm over the years. I think Dinesh Bhai, as well as Ajay and Mr. Nangia, all touched on very relevant points. There are three things which are stopping Indian firms. Two are not in their hands. One is in their hands. The one that is in their hands is culture and thinking, right? Are they really committing to quality? Are they committing to doing what's right over what's easy? Are they committing to that, prioritizing what's critical, my name or, building an institution, right? What's not in their hands is the demand, first of all. And Ms. Nangia gave the example of China. In China, when the government wanted to create 10 big Chinese firms, it supported those firms with demand for their services. government contracts, PSU audits were prioritized to be given to those firms. It was very clear we're not trying to create 100 firms, but these 10 firms will get all PSU listings in Hong Kong, each licenses as it was called. So it's a demand problem as much as supply problem. The supply, that's the chicken and egg. Do you expect the firms to, come together, invest, create supply, but there's no demand because somebody says Big 4 only or, Big 5 only today. So how do we create the demand for services? The second one or the third one, if culture was the first one, demand was the second one. The third one is capital. How do we provide investment capital? Because families, partners, etc., do not necessarily have the capital to invest like some of the bigger, Big 5, etc., have. That capital can come from the private equity ecosystem, as is the case in the Western markets today. There are 1 in 2 firms out of the top 30 in the UK which are today private equity owned. Private equity capital is sitting with huge interest to want to come and propel this business, only if regulations allow that. So those are the 3 things: culture, demand, and capital. 2 things are not in the hands of the Indian firms. We should not blame them. That's where they need government support. The third one, culture, they will fix. I'm absolutely sure there are enough old Indian institutions like you just referenced who will step up if the other 2 enablers were there.
Right. And Ajay Bal, coming to you. Now, when you speak about these Big 4 audit firms, the reason why almost 326 of the 486 Nifty 500 companies are audited by some of these Big 4 is possibly because they have an international name, and international practices require you to go to some of these Big 4 companies. How will India be able to generate demand and capital? This is going to be a big question. You can have the laws, the enabling factors to have mergers and acquisition, create those Big 4 companies, but then how do you have demand? Will you have to ensure that certain government contracts or certain government audits will only go to the Indian firms? And how will you differentiate between these Big 4 firms which are owned by Indian partners and those which are traditionally owned and run by Indian entities?
So first of all, when we talk about dominance, you're looking at the top end of the entities, but actually if you look at PIEs as a whole, public interest entities, we've looked at the number, it's under 25% or 26% of the audits are done by the Big 6, not just the Big 4, under 25%. So 75% of the companies which are either listed or which are PIIs, which are considered to be those which are governed now by NAFRA, are audited by other than the larger firms, number 1. Number 2, capital is also, at the end of the day, a creation of aggregation. If 3 firms get together and from 30 they become 100, you get common resources, you get a combination of funds, you're able to invest. We have an AZB merged our own practices post the merger. Large portion of the growth has been because we have now, common facilities. We have bring in better talent. We are able to hire people who believe there's a future beyond the founding partners. So capital is needed, but some degree of economies of scale can only happen if the smaller firms decide to aggregate. So there is nobody stopping them except themselves. And then there is this whole, I'd like to just add to what Vishesh said, but some other points. You see, what is holding them back? One is their own limitation, their willingness to be their own masters rather than be willing to have a conversation around becoming big. I have so many conversations at the Institute. Every time I talk about aggregation, some member will get up and say, but Mr. Wells, small is also good. So I said, but I'm not talking about small being bad or good being bad, but we are talking about growing. Number 2, we have archaic regulations with respect to advertising. And I'll give you a classic. Today, who is that impacting? Today, liquor advertising is banned in India, but every liquor company advertises around the globe. So your brands are building, you get their ads on YouTube, you get their ads when you travel overseas. So that brand is being built and the Indian entity, the subsidiaries are getting the benefit of that. Insofar as the larger firms are concerned, they don't advertise in India, but they advertise globally. And that benefit will also be available. Forget the consulting side of it. who's actually being hurt by all of this? The brand building exercise that is being affected is of the Indian firms who do not have today the ability to even appear. And Rakesh is appearing as Nangia and Company. He'll get a notice from the institute tomorrow that how have you been appearing with your name of your firm? Technically, he's not supposed to give his name when he appears in a program for the institute. That's how they look at it. You write an article, you can't say partner of Nangia and Company. So a lot of these archaic limitations have to grow. Number two, technology. And 2005, there is a study group report which said that these network firms are way ahead of us in knowledge and technology. And that is where the future of the profession lies. 25 years later, we are still calling to question those very same network arrangements which give the technology, and we bring in guidelines and we bring in this limitation and that limitation instead of opening it up. Open up the name. An Indian law firm can be set up with Apex, TPEX, whatever they want. You don't allow that for an Indian accounting firm. You don't allow them to brand build. So it's not just about what government should do. I think in the first instance, institute needs to get real and tell the government we are happy to have these advertising limitations go away. Secondly, the institute has to make it easier for firms to aggregate. I've looked at these aggregation guidelines. I can have a chat with you on that. They were bizarre. And you have to promote actual growth in size. And China, I have to say, Vishesh, I agree. It wasn't as simple as giving business. They supported those firms even through capital. They trained those people. I have examined the China model very carefully. It's very different. We don't have the China model in India, and we can't. We are a democracy. We have to let people make their choices of who they want to hire. Somebody wants Dhruva, he wants
time, unfortunately. Yeah. No, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Clearly, there are issues on the table which we'll have to address. One, of course, lifting these advertising limitations, then having some aggregation guidelines as well, and creating demand, and the brand India as well. How do you make sure that the brand of these big audit firms that we develop goes abroad and they are able to generate business for themselves as well? Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. That's all we have time for here on News Center. Goodbye.